Was this a fair trial?
There weren't fair charges, that's for sure. I didn't sit in on the trial, so I can't, very few of us did. So I'm not sure I could say the trial was fair or not, but certainly bringing the charges in the first place smack of some type of unfairness. Keep in mind, the previous district attorney, the elected district attorney, a man by the name of Cyrus Vance, who was very highly regarded before Alvin Bragg, chose not to bring charges based on these facts. The U.S. Federal Elections Commission chose not to bring charges based on these facts. The U.S. government chose not to bring charges based on these facts. In fact, Alvin Bragg originally, the DA from Manhattan now, originally refused to bring charges on these facts until parts of his team started quitting. So I think it bears discussion as to whether or not this was a fair trial from the beginning, not because of what happened inside the courtroom, but because of the nature of the charges to begin with.
Was it a political prosecution?
Alvin Bragg ran for office saying, elect me and I will go get Donald Trump. So I think you could take him at his own words. And given the fact that other people, so many other people, in fact, everybody else chose not to bring the case, if you were looking for evidence of a political witch hunt, there's certainly plenty of that out there.
What do you think the political consequences are of his conviction yesterday?
That remains to be seen. He certainly lost some votes, Stephen. There's going to be, to use generalizations, white suburban housewives in the Midwest who will not vote for a convicted felon. So he certainly lost some votes. It looks in the early sort of returns that we're seeing the media today, he's picking up some votes, specifically in the minority communities and so forth. There's also possibly some independent voters who will now see him as a victim. Keep in mind, less than a third of the people in recent polling think these charges are legitimate. So the fact that he's convicted of illegitimate charges in some people's minds may encourage them to vote for him. So it still remains to be seen. He did lose some votes last night, but it's possible he could have picked up just as many or possibly more.
Now, you've worked with the former president previously. How do you think he's coping with this trial and this conviction?
Yeah, that one I feel pretty good about. He hates it. He just can't stand it. He's angry. He's disappointed. He's looking for somebody to blame because no one wants this. No one wants to be a convicted felon. This is a blemish on his brand, on his legacy and so forth. At the same time, knowing him like I do, this will energize him to make him fight even harder for the election in November. So yeah, it's a setback. There's no question. He's angry. He's irate. He feels like he's been cheated, but he's going to channel that into more energetic campaigning.
So do you think we saw that anger in his response when he walked out of the courtroom and he made that very short statement?
Well, we saw it then. We saw it today. He gave about a half an hour's, it wasn't really a press conference because he didn't take questions, but it was more of the same. It was the airing of grievances. It was him giving his side of the story that he wasn't allowed to give in the courtroom. And that's typical for Trump. He just wants to get his message out there. If it can't come out through one means, it'll come out through another. So I think the real test is going to be the next couple of weeks to see if he changes his message. I don't think he's going to, Stephen. His message has been, look what they're doing to me. I'm rich, I'm famous, and I'm white. And if they can do this to me, imagine what they can do to you. Vote for me and I'll make sure that doesn't happen. That has been a message that has been propelling his campaign for several months now. So I think we'll see even more of that.
If this had happened to you or to me or to anyone else, the series of investigations, the prosecutions and so on, I think, you'd probably find it immensely, sort of the immense pressure would be very, very difficult to deal with. And particularly, everything that Trump's been through over the last 10 years has just been an extraordinary amount of kind of crises and various different chaotic kind of moments in his life. Do you think he's almost putting on a brave face? I mean, he doesn't seem to be having a breakdown, or he doesn't seem to be showing this publicly.
He's angry. He's not putting on a brave face. It's not like he walks out of the room and has a breakdown. That's not Donald Trump. But your point was a good one. If this happened to you or me, first of all, we'd be bankrupt. And that's part of the left's efforts. They can't bankrupt Donald Trump because he's got too much money, but they sued other people on the conservative right to try and drive them into personal bankruptcy. But more importantly, if this were you and me, these charges never would have been brought. The only reason these charges were brought is because it's Donald John Trump. I don't think anybody else, with the possible exception of John Edwards, a presidential candidate from about 20 years ago, has even been charged with anything similar, and certainly not in the state of New York or in Manhattan. So this wouldn't be happening to a normal citizen. It's only happening because of who he is. He knows that. It doesn't make him despondent. He's not putting on a brave face. He doesn't have to. He's just going to get angry. And when Donald Trump gets angry, he gets active.
Do you think that Republican district attorneys should turn their focus on their political opponents, particularly senior Democrats, Joe Biden and so on, in a kind of revenge move?
No, I don't think we should. We don't need to. I think we need to win this election. And I hope that's Trump's message. The best revenge, Stephen, is living well. And in this particular circumstance, the best revenge is winning the election. By the way, not just at the presidency. The fundraising that took place overnight, and it has been monstrous. I've been following some emails from folks I know in the Republican circles today. The fundraising overnight was tremendous, not just for Donald Trump. I've gotten a dozen emails from various people who are running for office referencing this jury decision, this trial, as a way to raise money for themselves. You know, send another one of Donald Trump's allies to Washington, D.C., that type of thing. If that catches on, and the Republicans really start to see a down ballot momentum driven by outrage against this verdict, that could be extraordinarily telling. That could be a tectonic sort of shift in American politics.
There certainly have been some Republican or conservative commentators. I'll give you one example, Matt Walsh, the kind of radio host, who are urging Republicans to do exactly that, what I mentioned, to go after Democrats using the law, using so-called lawfare. Do you think that if Democrats have actually abused their power or, are seemingly corrupt or have broken the law in various ways, maybe even in small ways, that Republicans, it's only fair that Republican prosecutors give them equal treatment to what Donald Trump and others have faced?
I agree with the premise, but your premise is that they've broken the law. If they've broken the law, then they should absolutely be pursued by attorneys general of either party. I think the case here with Donald Trump is I still don't know what law he broke. That's the difference here. And that's what I don't want to see Republicans copying. If we get to a point where Republicans are in charge, Democrats get charged and sent to jail for non-existent criminal charges, but then conversely, when Democrats are in charge, Republicans go to jail for the same thing. That's a frightening place to be. And I don't want my party to contribute to that. So if a Republican attorney general believes there's criminal activity on the part of a Democrat, I'd hope they'd be going against that anyway. It's the fabricating of criminal charges, as I believe the Democrat attorney general has done here, that frightens me the most. Because while Donald Trump has the gravitas and the money to stand up to the federal government, 99.9% of this population does not, including me and most of the people who are watching this in the United States. And we cannot afford to have the government turned into a weapon against law-abiding citizens.
Now, you're pretty plugged into the Republican Party, Republican circles in the United States. How do you think the mood has shifted since Trump's conviction?
I think a lot of us were hoping for an acquittal. I certainly was. I was surprised by the jury verdict simply because the charges were so complex and so unclear. And I used to practice law and worked in trials before, and I was looking at those the jury instructions, thinking this is really, really confusing. So we're a little bit surprised, but I think generally now the right is motivated. It's sort of been activated by a response to this. There's a lot of folks on the internet today, on social media, and to a certain extent in the more traditional meetings, saying we can't accept this verdict. I don't really know what that means. I've not heard, legitimate calls for certainly not civil unrest, not even civil disobedience. But what I hope will happen is that this will activate Republicans and even centrists alike to get more involved in the political process, because at the end of the day, these sorts of things can and should be resolved in the ballot box.
But what about the emotions? Are they running high amongst Republican supporters of Donald Trump, who are very loyal to this man? The MAGA crowd are incredibly kind of loyal to Trump. They see him as a great man, and this man may be going to prison. So do you think that the emotions are running, very high amongst his, greatest supporters?
Yeah, they were running high on both sides. There's no question. And you can't, look, if you like Donald Trump, yesterday was a cringe-worthy, sort of sad, dark day. And if you hate Donald Trump, yesterday was an ecstatic sort of outcome. The people on both sides are actively and emotionally engaged in this, and that's fine. I want people to be engaged in politics in my country. I just want them to do so in a way that's respectful on both sides. And I think the Democrats have violated that rule here. Bringing these charges in the first place disrespects the rule of law in this country. The case probably it never should have been brought and probably should have been thrown out before it even went to the jury. And again, I'm someone who's been critical of the president from time to time. So I'm not trying to simply take his side of things. These were trumped up charges, pun not intended. So yeah, the emotions are high, but they should be, because we've just convicted a former president of the United States of felony charges related to bookkeeping errors. Please allow that to sink in. And there are folks in this country who legitimately want to see him go to jail, who fantasize about him going to jail and being mistreated in jail. That's a sad and sick place to be. Especially when you start to think about the bookkeeping issues here. This was not murder. This is not the treason. This is not the sale of state secrets. This was a bookkeeping error almost 20 years ago, and yet criminal charges are brought against a former president. A dark day for our democracy, for sure.
Now, you mentioned that you've criticized Trump over various issues. Obviously, many Republicans have kind of rubbed up against him, particularly people who work with him in the administration. He's fallen out with various different political figures. Do you think that even the Republicans who are critical of Donald Trump, that this will sort of push them into his camp even more as they see the Democrats kind of going after their political opponents in this way?
Well, absolutely. But by the way, there's nothing wrong with being critical of politicians. You're never going to agree with somebody 100% of the time. I don't agree with my wife 100% of the time. So that doesn't bother me at all. But to your point, I think the answer is yes. It's certainly coalescing and galvanizing the Republican side of the ticket. There may be, like we said earlier on, he probably lost some votes, but did he gain some sort of right center voters who ordinarily, don't like his personality, don't like his style? But now we're looking their hand over and go, wow, between Donald Trump, whose maybe manners I don't like, and a Democrat Party that is weaponizing the legal system, give me Donald Trump every single day of the week. So yeah, I think that dynamic is out there. Certainly the Republican base has been motivated by this outcome. Perhaps there'll be folks in the center that will be motivated as well.
What about the reaction from Joe Biden to this conviction? I don't know if you've seen the video that came out in the last few hours of him smiling at a reporter's question about this. What do you make of his reaction to this whole episode?
Smug. I mean, look, he's been in Washington 50 odd years. He's an 84-year-old man, and I don't mean to make light of this. I'm not convinced that he's mentally fit for the office. So I don't know why he was smiling. He could have been thinking about what dessert he was going to be eating tonight. And I say that only half tongue in cheek. So look, this is the problem Biden has, which is fine, go out and spike the football. I would expect them to do that. There's going to be Democrats who are out there wanting to do a victory lap now that their opponent has been convicted of a crime, but they still have three eyes to deal with. They've got immigration, inflation, and Israel. And that is really what their problem is. In 2020, Joe Biden, it was enough for Joe Biden to not be Donald Trump in order to win the election. That's not going to be enough in 2024. And as much as folks dislike Donald Trump, if they feel like we're better off under the Trump presidency, then Donald Trump will be reelected again. And right now, that's where a small majority of Americans are.
What do you think happens to the political kind of calculations if Trump is sent to prison, his appeal fails, and the judge sentences him on the 11th of July?
It's an interesting hypothetical to discuss. I can't imagine that happening, Stephen. It's a non-violent offense for a first-time offender who is in his, I can't remember if he's 78 or 80. So the chances of him going to jail for this are extraordinarily low. Were it to happen, I think there might be a public outcry and action taken in Washington, D.C. I still don't think that we're a nation that goes to civil unrest or civil disobedience. But again, I think it's a hypothetical that's highly, highly unlikely to take place.
But there are other trials that Trump faces that might send him to prison. So it's not completely sort of unimaginable that this could be a scenario. I suppose that it all depends on whether he wins on November the 5th, because many of these trials are not happening until after the election.
Yeah, we sort of generally get the impression here that this is the only one. The one that just wrapped up last night in New York is the only one that will actually go to a jury before the election. Now, if he wins in November, he can pardon himself from the various federal charges. He can't pardon himself from the New York charge or the Georgia charge, but he could pardon himself from the federal charges. And if he loses, he could certainly go to prison because he'd just be an ordinary citizen at that point. So yeah, I think it's a valid conversation to have, but probably conversations that's best left till after the election. He is not going to prison if he wins the election, because there's no state in the, I don't even think a state can put a sitting president in jail. No, it's under our federalist system. I don't think that would even be permitted. So he would be allowed to serve out his term before hypothetically going to jail 4 or 5 years from now.
I don't know if you're a history buff, but do you think there's any history, sort of historical precedents for what's happened over the last 24 hours in American history?
I can't think of a thing. I honestly can't. I never thought I'd see the day when, look, I think we could all anticipate a president being charged with a crime in this day and age. I mean, well, you know, why not? If something happens, if a president shot somebody when he was out of office, if a president, again, stole information, sold it to our enemies, you know, it's highly unlikely, but this type of thing that you know, I guess is possible. I never thought I'd see the day where a former president of the United States of either party would be convicted of felonies for bookkeeping errors. That's frightening to me.
Thank you so much, Mick, for joining us. Really appreciate your time.